5 winds blow through cornfields once again for the glory of Jacoria.
I'm going to teach you how to play
Card Wars
because it is now available to play for everyone. Everything you need to know is going to be in this video, and how to actually get access will be towards the end. For anyone who doesn't know,
Card Wars
is a playable adaptation of Card Wars from Adventure Time. Strategic elemental deck building, creature combat, and plenty of room for chaos and creativity. Now, this is a playtest, so things are going to be fixed and improved thanks to your amazing feedback, which means parts of this video may become outdated. Last thing before I begin, you may have noticed that I'm saying
Card Wars
instead of Card Wars, and that is because this game isn't called Card Wars anymore. It's our own game with its own name, and I'll be revealing the name and addressing all of that in full at the end. Intro paragraph done. Now on to the game. This is a deck building game, and so before you can play, you must build a deck. There are currently 3 elements to choose from: doors, corn, and lizard holes, with the final element, crystals, on its way soon. To start your deck, you choose a combination of 4 unique lands from any elements. Choosing all 4 of the same element is the simplest way to start, but you can mix however you want. Then, for each land you choose, add 6 cards from its corresponding element into your actual deck. If you choose 4 corn lands, make a deck of 24 corn cards. If you choose 2 door, 1 corn, and 1 lizard hole land, you make a deck of 12 door cards, 6 corn cards, and 6 lizard hole cards. Each element has roughly 50 cards to choose from to build this deck, and you can only have 1 of each card in your deck unless otherwise specified. There are a few types of cards worth noting at this step. Aside from being things like creatures, structures, objects, spells, artifacts, and lands, there are several broader card categories which are denoted by symbols before a card's name. Cards with an asterisk before them are spawn cards. These cards cannot be added to the deck directly and are instead created by the effects of other cards. Cards with a greater than symbol mean they are out cards. Out cards are added to your deck or to set up via the lands that you choose. I'll talk about that in a second. Lastly, cards marked with the less than symbol are lands. I know these cards are distinguished as normal, but the clarity doesn't hurt. Once you've assembled your 24 card deck, check the lands you chose for if they add cards to your deck. These cards are out cards. For example, the Door Village land adds a Ding Dong Ditcher to your deck, which will make it a 25 card deck. You will also notice that many lands add cards not just to your deck, but to your setup. These are also out cards, but I'll cover this when I go over the setup of the game. Just grab all the cards they mention and put them with your lands for now. Oh my gosh, I almost forgot to mention merch. We have merch. BigHoles.gay. That's our merch store. For real. I'm not joking. We have shirts, hoodies, and pins featuring 4 original designs from incredible artists, and because I'm basically Jesus, the pins are now
30% off.
The shirts and hoodies are simple and embroidered, so you can wear them every single day. Everyone you know will be jealous and ask you what that thing on your shirt/hoodie/pin is, and you'll awkwardly respond about how it's from a YouTuber you sort of like, and they'll be like, oh cool, what YouTuber? And you'll have to say Big Holes out loud to them, and they'll be confused and probably ask for more details, so you might end up just showing them our channel on your phone to end the conversation, and they'll be like, oh cool, I'll check that out, but they won't actually remember to check it out. They were just, being nice. But none of that matters, because the entire time you'll be comfortable and stylish wearing our amazing apparel you bought from BigHoles.gay. I will call attention to the fact that more lands than not call for you to add a basic structure to your setup. Each element has a single basic structure, and if a land calls for you to add that one to your setup, you add the basic structure corresponding to the land's element. Basic structures are actively bad. They do nothing on their own, but if they are destroyed while an enemy creature is present in their land, they trigger a negative effect on the player that controls the structure. This negative is tailored to the basic structure's corresponding element. So, the farmstead, which is the corn's basic structure, forces you to discard husks from your hand. So now you have a deck. Good for you, kid. Time to actually learn to play. Okay, first things first, find an opponent. Actually, find a game board. The game board is laid out between the 2 players with a space in front of each player to be their active area. The board itself is made up of 4 lanes and 2 kingdoms, one owned by each player. Place your deck and spawn cards to the side of the board and your lands and set up out cards in front of you. Then determine the first player. Flip a coin or something. Whichever player goes first places their 4 land cards, one in each lane of their active area, however they so wish. The corresponding land on the board is now defined and represented by the card you placed under it. Once the first player is done, the other player does the same. Then both players take the setup cards corresponding to each land that they have and place them below their respective lands in the creature and structure rows of your active area if applicable. Now, place pieces onto the board corresponding to the creatures and structure cards in your active area. In general, you're always going to place a piece onto the board to represent structure, creature, and object cards you place into your active area. Once both players have their kingdom set up, the game itself can begin. Both players draw a hand of 5 cards, and the winner of the coin toss takes the first turn. Before I go into turn structure, commit to memory that the first player does not discard and draw, creatures cannot be activated, and effects/abilities that target the enemy kingdom or anything in it cannot be used on the first turn. Essentially, you just can't mess with anything your opponent has or cross into their kingdom on turn 1. Now we're going to get into the proper skeleton of the game, so pay close attention. A player's turn is divided into 7 phases: reset, discard and draw, command, reaction, battle, and main. This might sound like a lot, but really the steps have just been broken down maybe a bit further than they need to be for clarity's sake. A lot of these phases are quite short. First is reset. Any beginning of turn effects trigger here, then the main player, the player whose turn it is, resets all their creatures back to idle. The first player won't have anything to reset here. Then is discard and draw, which is pretty self-explanatory. You discard a card face down, since your discard pile is secret, and pick up a new card to replace it. You must do both every turn, but if you have no cards in hand to discard, you do not draw a card either. During your command phase, you may move non-exhausted creatures you control between any adjacent lands within your kingdom, but not into lands containing enemy creatures. You may move out of lands that contain creatures, so long as it's also from a land in your kingdom to another. Essentially, you can't move into lands with enemies, across the kingdom divide, or between lands in the enemy kingdom. During your command phase, you can also floop non-exhausted cards in your active area to trigger their floop effect: creatures, structures, whatever. Lastly, you may activate creatures during your command phase. Activating is the way you make your creatures fight, and is also the way you can move your creatures into the enemy kingdom or into lands with enemy creatures. Some creatures may also have unique activate abilities. To use them, just activate the creature like normal right now, and I'll come back to that. Now, once you activate all the creatures that you want, don't move them yet, and don't trigger any of their abilities. Before all of that will happen, your opponent gets a reaction phase during your turn. During their reaction phase, your opponent can see what you have activated and then do these 3 things: exhaust creatures to defend, cast spells from their hand, and floop unexhausted creatures they have in their active area. All of these effects trigger immediately and are intended as an opportunity for your opponent to defend themselves with abilities they may have set up. For example, the Door Knight can be flooped during your opponent's reaction phase to make these 2 lands no longer adjacent, stopping you from marching forwards. Exhausting creatures to defend is a unique action to the reaction phase. When done, it essentially makes it so that the chosen creatures need to be targeted first in combat. Otherwise, the attacking player can decide how all of the battling is organized. Once the reacting player has done whatever they want, the battle phase begins. The main player then looks at all of their activated creatures, which are now considered battling. If a battling creature is already in a land with enemy pieces, it may remain where it is. Otherwise, it must enter an adjacent land which contains enemy pieces, a land that is in the enemy kingdom, or simply cross the kingdom divide. Alternatively, before moving anything, if a creature has an aforementioned activate ability, you may trigger it at this time. After resolving this ability, the creature is now just plain exhausted and no longer battling. For clarity, it's best to place defending and battling creature pieces towards the front of their land. Now there are going to be battling creatures mixed with enemy pieces, and we begin the actual combat resolution. This is the part of the game which is easiest to get confused by. The main player chooses the land which contains battling enemy creatures that they control and any enemy pieces to resolve. When resolving combat in a land, the main player selects a battling creature they control there and targets an enemy piece for it to attack. If there are any defending creatures here, they must be targeted first. The 2 pieces then deal their attack value in damage to one another, which is tracked with a die on their card. If something doesn't have an attack stat, like a structure, it doesn't deal any damage. If either runs out of health, it dies. Its piece is removed and the card is discarded. Effects caused by this then immediately trigger. If a creature survives this exchange, it is no longer considered battling or defending. Then if the opponent still has defending creatures, they may select one of their defending creatures to attack one of your battling creatures. Both players then alternate attacking like this until there are no more battling creatures. If there are no defending creatures to target, the main player may freely target any pieces in that land to attack with their battling creatures, even attacking the same target multiple times. Once the main player has no more attacking creatures, even if there are still defending creatures, combat in this land ends. After the combat in the land has been resolved, the main player then chooses the next land with battling creatures to resolve. If none are left, the battle phase is over. Now the final phase is the main phase. It's weird that the quote-unquote main phase is at the end of your turn. We're thinking about renaming it since the name is just sort of an artifact from switching the phases around. Don't think too hard about it. During your main phase, you can play spells and floop cards in your active area just like in your command phase, but you can also play the other types of cards: creatures, structures, objects, and artifacts into your kingdom. Cards can even be flooped the same turn that they are played. Each of your lands can only contain one non-basic structure, and you also cannot play creatures or structures into lands that contain more enemy structures and or creatures than your own. In light of their relevance, let's talk about the cards themselves for a moment. You can tell what kind of card it is at the bottom along with its element. Here is its name. Here's where the stats go, here are its abilities, and here is a vestigial thing you don't need to worry about. Creatures, structures, and objects have a health stat, but only creatures have an attack stat. Artifacts are equipables and can be played onto your creatures to give them more powers. There is no limit to the number of artifacts a creature can have. Some cards also have keywords, which go in this little spot here. Keywords essentially summarize common functions or abilities that a card has. There are several vestigial keywords that may be floating around on some cards, such as area, profit, non-profit, and lazy. These currently mean nothing. The keywords that do mean something, however, are as follows: Agile/flying. This creature may move freely between any adjacent lands, even into the enemy kingdom, so long as they do not contain enemy creatures. Immobile. This creature cannot voluntarily move for any reason. Slow. Whenever this creature moves, it immediately exhausts, so it can only move one space per turn, even in its owner's kingdom. Berserk. This creature's attack is 0 on the opponent's turn. Blitz. This card can be played from your hand during your command phase as if it was your main phase. Basic. This structure is element specific and exclusive to setup. Husk. When this creature dies, add a Husk spawn card to your hand. When it's on a spell, add a Husk to your hand after the immediate effects of the spell resolve. Swarm. This creature cannot move, floop, or activate on its own. If any allied cards here floop or activate, this creature will also floop or activate. If any allied creatures here move to an adjacent land, this creature will also move to that adjacent land. This keyword has no effect on combat resolution once the cards are actually activated. Burrow. When a creature with Burrow resets, search your discard pile for creatures with health totaling to the level of Burrow that triggered, subtracted by the number of creatures you currently control. Then, place those creatures onto the land with a resetting Burrow creature. Any creatures played from Burrow get the Swarm keyword. The effects of Burrow do not stack if multiple Burrow creatures reset simultaneously. Once you're all set playing cards, your turn is over. Both players take turns back and forth until one player has no more creatures or structures in their active area due to them being destroyed, killed, or otherwise removed. The player with cards left in their active area is then pronounced the winner. Okay, that's the game.
Card Wars.
What I meant to say was Elemental Incursion. This logo is just a mock-up, don't scrutinize, please. So, Elemental Incursion. I'm just gonna talk and let some clips play if that's alright. At the start, everything was about show accuracy, down to the frame. I was unsatisfied with the other adaptations of Card Wars and wanted to use my skills and free time to bring what I wanted out of Card Wars into the world. So, where the other games took the license and made a game, I intended to take the game and forget entirely about the license. Now, this approach created a really good foundation. It was like picking up big globs of wet clay and throwing them together into a sculpture shaped like the Card Wars I wanted. Dare I say, we wanted. With this approach, I was able to make a game of this complexity really quickly, but eventually it started to sag a little bit. The rules of Card Wars as we see it in the show are nonsense. We all know that. And there is a literal disconnect from the game we see played and the rules we are told about the game. We are told you discard and draw at the start of your turn, but their hand sizes throughout the episode don't reflect that. We are told there is an economy, but we never see it. When you add up all the rules, all the context, and all the mechanics, you only get Card Wars when you play it beat by beat how they play it in the show. So if you remove the narrative, which is what we're doing, you're left with a bunch of rules designed to serve a sequence of events that just isn't happening. So here I am with a jumble of rules that vaguely add up to the fuzzy silhouette of Card Wars, and I realize that, at this point, we need to ditch the 100% show accuracy thing to get show accurate Card Wars. If you've been following closely, you've probably noticed it already anyway. The fact that I'm not shying away from breaking the show accuracy here and there. It was an indispensable stepping stone to get to this point, but I'm going to be making a few more cuts than we originally envisioned. To be clear though, EI is still an adaptation of Card Wars, and it's still going to take a bunch more time to finish. In the meantime though, the playtest is out for the public, for everybody. All you need is Tabletop Simulator on Steam. Unfortunately, there's no way around that, but from there, you can subscribe to the workshop mod to load it into your game. There is an announcement in our Discord server, a YouTube community post, and information in the description to help you get playing. There is also a link to a Google form for you to give us feedback with, so please send us all of your input. It is the entire reason we're doing this. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'd appreciate it if you subscribed. I look forward to all of your feedback, and remember the pins are 30% off at bigholes.gay. Merch plug, bigholes.gay.